Age of Wonders 4 can be thought of as combining the world map and to some degree the base management of Total War Warhammer with the combat maps and location fights of Heroes of Might and Magic. It focuses on turn-based strategy and highly customizable factions and technology choices, and it's because of these reasons almost exactly the type of game that I'm most interested in. And specifically what I'd like to be doing in a game with a like Age of Wonders 4 is playing turn-based multiplayer, so I can really dig into the depth and complexity of this type of game. My projected rating for this game was a B, but after playing it for the first maybe 30 hours or so on stream, I changed my initial rating to an A. I was really impressed with what I was seeing. However, I've got another 170 hours or so since then, which puts me at around 200 hours as I review this, and I've got a lot to talk about. Let's start with the high points. Let's talk about what I like about this game, and there's so much here. So first of all, I am super impressed with the faction creation. This constitutes a really nice set of systems that link together. You are choosing racial traits, a faction which unlocks units, buildings, bonuses, and affinities. You're taking two society picks, two different ones, which include things that are pretty majorly shaping bonuses for how your civilization will behave. You get additional starting units based on these society picks, and you get more affinities. More on that later. And then you choose the starting tech that you start with, the tome that you unlock. And this is the spells, units, unit enhancements, special provinces and buildings, as well as affinities again. And then finally, you customize the hero type. You're playing a wizard king or a champion, the starting skills of that hero to some degree, and the starting items of that hero to some degree. Combined, this is awesome. There's a ton of different combinations you can make from this, and this is a system that allows for new DLCs and new content to expand on this really easily. I love this system. It's super good. It's probably the best system in the game right now. There's also the tome system, which I enjoy. This is a combination magic/tech system. This is where you unlock a number of the things mentioned before: units, spells, both combat spells and strategic spells, some buildings, some province improvements. Everything like this is unlocked here, and it has a tier system. So every two tomes you take of one tier, you can move on to the next tier. It goes all the way up to tier 5. There's 12 tomes per tier. Each of these things has 6 different cards in each tome. So there are a ton of different ways that you can build into these. All of these things interact with the next system, which I like too, which is the Empire Development System. This looks at your affinities, which are determined by all the factors I just previously listed, and the combination of your affinities determines how quickly you get access to buying the empire development skills, which are a series of different ways that you can change your empire using a limited resource to upgrade and specialize your troops in the way you play and the rest of it. It's really cool. I really like this system. I like how they play together so well. I also really like the combat system. Combat is taken as you engage one army, engages another army, and you can have stacks of 6 units together that make up an army. There's a max of 18 per fight, so or rather 3 full stacks per side. So you can engage on 18 on 18 unit combat inside of a specially it's not generated, it's not procedurally generated, but there's like a map per terrain kind of deal. So you get pulled into a combat map, and the combat map has all sorts of really cool interactions. Things like, it's first of all, it's tile-based, which is great. It's hexagon grid, which is great. It's got flanking combat spell points, which are different than your world spell points. So you have a limited number of spells you can cast that are limited, and not just by mana, but also by certain like racial characteristics you take and units you bring. There's lots of the units have unique abilities that have cooldowns. There's army bonuses from support heroes, so entire like types of units or sometimes entire units and armies can get buffs. There's terrain. It's just cool. It's really well done. I really like it. The magic system is super good too. In addition to the number of combat spells you have, there's strategic spells and enhancement spells. These are spells that you cast on the world map to impact other people's areas, your city's productions, the types of rewards you get when you kill enemy armies. These can be things like enhanced in units. So if you're going like a all swordsman build for some reason, where you're building tons and tons of shield units, you may specialize in enhancements that make your shield units behave differently, like do additional damage or have rider effects on their attacks or steal morale or this type of thing. It's all really great. These spells can change your units by type. They can change your units by the racial affiliation of your units. They can change it by role. It's just they're really cool. The hero builds are great too. There are a number of hero skills that are defined by a combination of your racial picks as well as the tech picks you unlock. So heroes get stronger across time, and not only in just their raw stats, but also in the types of things they can do. So sometimes there's stat nodes you take, sometimes there are like extra abilities that you unlock. They get levels throughout all of this, and also item progression as you loot and equip items on your heroes. All this is super cool. The units themselves progress, which is great. Units level up as they get to certain tiers of leveling. They get special bonuses like extra damage or behavioral changes like becoming immune to opportunity attacks or stuff like this. But they also just gain raw HP per level. And there's a really interesting XP interaction that units have, some of the units have, called Evolve, where your unit starts off as a lower tier unit, and when it reaches some threshold of experience, it evolves into the next tier of unit. So it go from like a tier 2 to a tier 3 with the becoming that new unit. So getting all the bonuses that new unit would have. But this is really nice for some of the animal-based strategies where like you get like one round of spider that evolves into the next round of spider as you fight into a later game. I love this. It's super cool. Really nice idea. Really fun to play with. I like their free cities by and large. There's tons of problems with them. I'll get to them later. But the idea of their free cities are pretty nice. Smaller, semi-independent states that you interact with in a different way than other empires. You might vassalize them, you might conquer them, you might fight with them, you might be part of a war against somebody else and therefore have to deal with their city-states. They're a nice additional thing to have on the world map to interact with. On that note, I also like the idea of their diplomacy system. War is not just something you can declare and not declare, declare and undeclare rather, or just go into. There's penalties associated with that. I currently think their diplomacy system is not working, but the idea of it being not a binary thing, but having degrees and having certain characteristics that you have to get to before you can do these things, and limitations on the types of things you can do without incurring penalties, all of that I think is pretty cool for a game like this. I love their auto resolve. I love the fact that I can come up to an army and click auto resolve, and if my my army is majorly better than their army, that I will probably walk away from that fight with a pretty decisive victory, with probably hopefully no losses, and not have to spend the time to go to the world map on trivial fights, so that I can increase my ability to play this longevity wise without getting bored, without having to manually fight every single garbage fight. That said, lots of problems there. We'll get to it later. The auto resolve has some nice features too, which is you can click to watch the replay of what was happening on that, and you can also engage the auto system at any point in the fight. So I can fight the first half of the fight, and when it's clean up, just switch to auto or some version of that. And after you get the results of the auto system, you can then choose whether or not you wish to manually redo that fight to get a better outcome. These are great. These are great features. The auto resolve has some problems, more with that later, but the idea of it is super cool. I love it. And finally, I like that this game has a built-in play by email, which these days is really play by cloud, but it's the same kind of idea. The idea is this game is designed to be a turn-based game, and there's a system that they have built into the core game that is supposed to facilitate players being able to get turn-based matches with each other and sustain this across the days and sometimes weeks that such a match will take. That's great. That's how these games are designed to be played, and the best multiplayer experiences I've had with these types of games have been in that format. That said, there's even more dislikes. There's so many here as well. I have to break these into categories because there's so many things I dislike about this game. I'm going to start with the AI to begin with. The AI is awful. It is the illusion of an opponent. At the very best, it's an illusion of an opponent. At the hardest level available to you, so brutal difficulty or whatever it is, I believe it's full cheater, right? So when you actually engage with their enemies in the end, when you fight into their lands, they haven't cleared the camps inside their terrain, which is about a third of the value of the terrain, or rather 2/3 of the value of the terrain for being in there. They don't bother clearing that. I can't prove this yet, but suspiciously they tend to hit their tech timings nearly identically, like for the win cons for magic stuff, etc. But really when you see it when you watch the AI fight. So you can watch replays of your own units on auto resolve, and also when you fight the enemy units, you see how they behave. They can't fight. They don't understand the units. They don't understand the abilities or the placement of units. They don't understand how to combo these things well together. I'll give you an example. I autoed a fight, and my archer hero, who had an item which had a cone debuff, it wasn't even a damage thing, raced forward as far as it could, blinked forward on top of that, so it's now in melee range with the enemies, totally isolated from the rest of its units. It has full archer promotion, so it has a bunch of hero skill points that are assigned to archer promotions, where it then proceeded to use that cone AoE debuff ability and end its turn horrendously flanked, deep in enemy territory, totally isolated from the rest of the friendly units, not having fired its bow attack even once. That's about par for the course for how the AI behaves. You can't get a game with the AI past one playthrough. I can't get single player replayability at all because it doesn't have any challenge level at all. And when you play a game, when you play something that is low challenge and low skill, the psychological phenomenon you get out of that is apathy. You don't care. You can't be bothered to do anything because nothing matters, because everything you do will win. It poses zero threat strategically. The AI is so bad that the Magic Win Con, which is a long channeled summoning spell that you're supposed to have to defend as it gets disrupted by enemy threats, spawns random neutral armies to come and attack you because the actual AI you're fighting against is so bad at actually getting its shit together and coming to attack you in your own lands that my suspicion for this is it's just to give you something to do while you're hitting end turn and being totally not contested to win the game. It's awful. I played 2 single player games and I couldn't even finish the second one because the AI was so bad and the games were already so one-dimensional, so similar, and so just face roll. I can't say enough negative things about this AI. It's not playable, which sucks because that's one of the 2 ways I can play this game, single player and multiplayer. And I can't play single player anymore because there's nothing to do that engages me in any fun way. As soon as I start interacting with their systems of crafting interesting factions and actually engaging with their very interesting combat systems, I'm absolutely destroying the AI at everything they might be doing. That's awful. All right, next up, balance. I get that one of the byproducts of multiple complex interrelated systems is that balance is going to be hard. I got it, but we got to do better than this. Versus the AI, nothing matters at all because everything beats the AI because the AI is so bad. Versus humans, there's like an endless list of major imbalances that make this game difficult to impossible to play in multiplayer. I'll try to give some highlights here. So the map generator is one of the starting problems. This is a big problem, and map generation is independent of balance, but has a major feedback loop with this. Currently, you cannot select the size of the map. All you can select is the player start distance, close, standard, or far, which determines part of how big the map is, and the number of players. And that's it. That's how the map size is determined. And the problem is, if the map is too big, you never interact with anything. And if it's too small, the fights are almost instantaneous. And the fights in this game as it stands right now, there are very few comeback mechanics. So the game is resolved almost instantly. So I end up in one of these scenarios where I don't meet my opponents for 30 turns, and more on why that's a huge problem later, or I end up where I've met them on like turn 2 and we've had our final battle on turn 8, and that's the end of the game. It's not good. The map generation needs love. There's a lot of features you can choose to add or remove on these maps, but they do not impact the core problem of the sizing and pacing of how the player interactions work. Let's do some other low-hanging fruit stuff. The traits, which are part of the building of the civilizations that you're playing, have clear standouts. There's both some really good ones and some really bad ones in there. And the problem is you don't ever use the bad ones, and most of the medium ones get lost in there. Societies are the same way, although there's really 4 societies per affinity. Realistically, you probably can't use about half of them if you're playing multiplayer right now, that the strategies are either so niche or so weak compared to the other strategies that about half of them are just not playable kind of deal. The tech tomes are wildly imbalanced right now. Some of them have incredible bonuses and lots of of the 6 cards, 4 of them are great, where some of them have, of the 6 cards, 1 of them is good kind of deal. And there are imbalances in the affinities themselves. So some affinities are better to have than others. So and those are interacting unpleasantly with the tome imbalances as well. So that sometimes you're not only picking a better 6-portion tech card, but it also gives you better benefits in other portions of the game. Societies there. Unit balance is all over the place. Summons as a whole are pretty broken. They are broken as disposable units that you can rapidly creep with. The AI doesn't target differently for summons. For example, hero summons themselves are super ridiculous. They make every fight basically trivial. Summoning as a pillaging strategy is pretty ridiculous. You can cast summons in opponent's territory until they get a Spelljammer. More on Spelljammers later. But this means if you have a single unit like a scout that can see enemy territory, you can spawn a summon. The summon can move, get more sight, and then you can cast another summon, and you can do this type of thing. Summons are a problem. Summons versus hard-built units are a problem. So the way that tech works in this game is you may unlock summon unit. The unit is a permanent unit that you summon. Because you can cast summons basically anywhere, your army may be really far away from your resupply point, like really far away from your capital. So if you unlock a hard-built unit and a summoned unit at the same time, the summoned unit can instantly be deployed to battle. The hard-built unit has to be built in the city and then moved out there. The resource scaling is different. You get more combat points faster and have more accessibility to mana than you really do draft. So your summoned units are easier to get a hold of and better to deploy. So summoned units tend to be just used way more than the hard-built units. Your T3 faction units are really inaccessible. They are locked behind a tier 3 upgrade, which is a very expensive upgrade, but units of the same power level can be unlocked in tomes much more rapidly and then can be built from any city at least tier 2, I think tier 1, but at least tier 2, so you don't have to go to unlock tier 3, which means that the tier 3 faction units just end up being weaker than the tier 3 tome units because they just come online so much later with so much more expense but aren't any better. There's just problems with the unit balance, summons and other units. There's also standout winners and losers in the unit game. Like some of these units are just like there's no use for them. They're terrible. Some are just exceptionally good all of the time. For some reason, they're buffing 2 of the exceptionally good ones in the next patch. God alone knows why, but that's how it's going. Heroes. Heroes are probably pretty broken right now too. At the moment, adding more heroes past your hero supply limit charges you 30 gold per turn to have them, as well as the cost of recruiting the hero. But the upkeep of like a tier 2 unit is 20 gold. So you get a unit that is much more powerful than you get a hero which is much more powerful than a unit, but it doesn't cost you much more to sustain having many more of these. So stacking heroes is extremely strong. Hero level 5s, which include 3 different very powerful summon spells, are really broken right now. If you get a 6 stack of heroes or a 4 stack of heroes running around with summons, they can pretty much clear any content in the game, including tier 3 wonders, which have incredible rewards at 0 risk to you and 0 cost. You're just using summons that are instantly replaced every fight. Item swapping on heroes is really unpleasant. Currently, mounts are incredibly powerful on heroes for upping their movement points, but you can swap. If you have 1 mount and 4 heroes, you can just move 1 hero, swap them out, move the next hero, swap them out, move the next hero. It's tedious, but it's necessary to get the best out of that. I don't like that at all. I don't want to have to do that, but the difference in being mounted or not is insane. Let's see. Hero skill builds are problematic right now. Some skills are really good, some are really bad. It's often easy to see that. There is a archetype that's supposed to exist, which is the army support hero, who takes a bunch of skills that enable the army to be better. The problem is these skills almost always require those units be in the stack with that hero on a fight, so it doesn't buff all 18 of your units you could deploy to the combat map. It only buffs the other 5 units who are in that same stack with the hero is how that behaves. They have to be leading the army. And the problem with that is your heroes are almost always faster than your units, with some very few exceptions. And that means your heroes are always the ones engaging battles, pulling other stacks in. The way that units move and behave, or rather the way that heroes move and behave, doesn't allow you to really use these support skills well. The heroes are almost always faster, and they tend to do this kind of like your central army is in the middle, and then your hero branches out to attack each of the things that you want to attack, pulling your central army in each time, but not requiring your central army use the movement. Yes, you can do something like leave your hero on those stacks always, but you give up huge amounts of the mobility power that the hero brings to do that, and it just makes it worse all around. Additionally, there's problems when you put multiple heroes together. The Empire leader always supersedes the other heroes in terms of who is doing the leading of that army. I'm not sure if this is an experience thing, as my leader is always higher level than all my other heroes, or if it is a leader thing, but it means that I pretty much need to, if I'm going to do any of these support builds, my primary leader needs to be doing that so I can actually get these benefits. I think it's a really cool idea, these army buffing heroes, but it's really difficult to find a playstyle that actually supports bringing them in, which makes this build much worse than the other builds most of the time. What else? Losing heroes on the combat map is insanely punishing. It's a huge morale hit. If you lose your leader, you lose access to all of your spells until your leader respawns. If a hero dies and you don't win the fight, the enemy gets your hero in one of a couple different ways. They can get them as a corpse or get them as a prisoner. If they get them as a corpse, they can revive your hero to fight on their side, including all of the items you had equipped on them. If they choose to just sell that hero, they get sell the hero's remains, they get all of those items, so it's super swingy. Lose a fight to an opponent, you're already in bad shape. Lose a fight and lose a hero to an opponent, or lose your hero as part of that fight. Your opponent not only killed your hero, but gets a big portion of all the benefits that hero gives you. Focus firing heroes is pretty easy most of the time because ranged focus fire is such a strong part of the metagame right now, which makes it really hard to play any of the melee roles on a hero by and large, especially non-shield hero melee roles like the skirmisher hero who runs in and hits things with a lance kind of deal. The problem is your hero just gets instantly focused down and killed, so you tend to be this like backline ranged unit all the time. I wish they would figure that out a little bit more. Let's see, what else is not good balance-wise? Casting points. What a cool idea to have casting points as a second limiting thing, both on the strategic and the combat map, but there's all sorts of problems with it. The balance between the Wizard King and Champion archetype heroes is pretty bad right now. The combat point scaling and world map scaling that Wizard King give is really powerful compared to the Champion bonuses, to the point where I don't really think it's worth picking Champion for probably 90% of the things you might want to do, 90% of your games. Casting spells and teching spells. So when you cast a spell, you don't have to release it necessarily. You can prep it ahead of time, which takes some of your world map points to do so. But once you've done that, it doesn't tell you the cost of that spell. The cost of that spell is removed from your interface. And teching spells doesn't tell the mana cost as you tech it. It's a small kind of point here, but it's really annoying for me. Unit spell resist and status resist applies to everything, so this makes some really weird interactions with some spells. It makes a lot of your non-buff spells feel very weak compared to buff spells because they'll lose like something like 70% of their effectiveness and damage, or 60% of their effectiveness and damage, and won't apply any of the dot debuffs that you're supposed to be doing. Dots are also reduced by spell resist, so I finally land my lightning dot on my opponent's unit who's highly lightning resistant. He takes almost no damage from the dot kind of deal, this type of stuff. And world map spells have some really weird hidden modifier that I haven't figured out exactly yet, where they don't do the damage listed and sometimes have really ridiculous effects in addition to what they say they're going to be doing, like some stacking stuff that shouldn't be there kind of deal. And then the meta seems to be these range meta with mobility units like teleporters or very fast units, that kind of thing. And it makes it's kind of made worse by the way the world spells work for me. All right, the Empire development tree, which I like as a system, is also super out of balance. It seems to be mostly fine early, although some of it's broken down by affinity. So there's a number of different affinities in the game. Some of them are very weak compared to others on this tree. For example, the Chaos affinity is extremely weak in the early game compared to the other ones, in my opinion, which leaves some like weird things where you want to avoid certain affinities, not because you don't like the tomes and races associated with them, but because the Empire development tree is so bad for them that taking points in that affinity is going to hurt you. It has really weird scaling. Some of the late game abilities are clearly like economic abilities, which are meant to build you up over time, but they're in the very, very late portions of that tree, which means by the time you get them, you don't want them anymore. Some of them have really weird scaling just in general for their cost versus their effects. Like there's one that gives me like a one-time 500 knowledge boost every single time I've ever got to that affinity in a game that I'm playing. My tech per turn is more than 500, which means that it's less than a turn for like 500 Imperium or 300 Imperium or something ridiculous, some very high cost for this. It's just that tree is out of whack with the way the actual tech and unit progression on the world works, and out of balance with itself, which is a problem. Many world map spells are just not well balanced, in addition to having the problems of whatever the hidden modifiers for casting. What it really feels like to me is the point casting system was expected to have lower totals than it currently has, which means that things that were only supposed to happen maybe once or twice per turn are happening like 4 or 5 times per turn. It makes combat summons faster because they have a point cost. And if you have a ton of points, you can cast more summons in the same amount of time. It makes debuff spells more powerful because maybe you were only supposed to hit 1 army with it, but you can hit 3 armies or 4 armies or the same army multiple times. Some of these spell effects shouldn't stack and do, like there's a movement reduction spell that's a 50% movement reduction spell. It stacks. If you hit the same army with it twice, it's 100% movement reduction. So you can literally take an enemy hero's army and they can just never move again for every turn kind of deal. There's some really broken mechanics in this game. One of them is spell jamming, which is an interesting idea. You build an improvement, it makes your city's domain be protected from spell jamming from enemy spells they can't cast in that domain. But the problem is, it's how do you attack an enemy where the player who owns the area can cast spells, but you can't? There is a way to disable that spell jammer, but it requires you go and pillage it. Pillaging is a multi-turn process, and the enemy can just move their armies and fight you there. And if you're fighting on the spell jammer, you can't cancel the spell jammer, so you have the same problem. Fighting as a whole is kind of imbalanced too. The PvE rewards of this game are super high. It's the economy of this is vastly accelerated. If you're constantly moving around with your armies and clearing out camps, you get rewards for clearing the camps in addition to just having the location to expand to. But there's also tons of resources that come in that way. This is how your heroes level. This is how your armies level. This is how you get new items. That is all interesting to some degree, but there's some problems with that. Again, it rewards these super high mobility summoning strats. It kind of feeds into that problem. You can't really be stationary with this stuff. Fighting itself, there's a single engagement basically with no comeback mechanics. I've yet to have any multiplayer games where there were more than one. I think maybe we'll get a game here where we're going to have 2 fights because it's so swingy, the outcome of this for the game. There just don't seem to be comeback mechanics. In fact, there's the opposite of comeback mechanics. There's win more mechanics. When I kill enemy heroes, I get, not only do I already told you about winning the hero itself, but I get science for killing the enemy hero. My opponent loses ability to cast spells for a couple turns. Morale is super snowbally, so if I do kill an enemy unit on the battle map, enemy heroes in the battle map, I often can break the morale of their entire army, causing their entire army to rout. There isn't really a reason to split up units right now either, which means that my army movements tend to be like blobby. I'll move all 3 armies together because I can't risk losing a fight, and that means I need everyone together, but there aren't multiple objectives to spread that out. That has problems with, like, for example, their siege system, which is also kind of a low point for me. The siege system is designed to be such that the player defending builds defensive structures, which increases the amount of time it takes for the enemy to siege. The enemy can't take the city or attack the city until the siege is complete. But in reality, there's no time to ever build defensive structures, and it doesn't really work that way at all. And in part because there's no reason to multiple objective with this, right? You don't have enough sets of forces and enough things to be doing to spread them out enough to have multiple armies out there. It just doesn't work right now. Diplomacy isn't working right now, and free cities are really questionably working right now. Diplomacy is designed to be, you generate grievances either by faking them or by having your opponents do things around you, and you then justify your wars to go and do with this. This is fine in single player, it kind of works there. In multiplayer, it breaks down entirely. You can start permanent war, which is probably the way to do it, but it kind of makes the whole point of the diplomacy system irrelevant. And weirdly, there's huge penalties if you break this. If you go to war without having a justified war, there's a huge penalty. It seems to scale across the course of the game. I think it starts at 20%. It's like 60% later of your entire Imperium upkeep to do this, and huge hits with relationships with everybody else, including all your vassals and free cities. Weirdly, there's no penalty for attacking a free city. It's like a -5 alignment penalty or something, right? Which means I can't. The whatever global court is arbitrating my disputes with other nations here doesn't allow me to aggress another nation without huge cost. The free cities, I can just go stomp and take over. And because the AI is useless, there's tons of value in taking over free cities. Free cities have hero leaders with them. There's a million benefits to doing this. They are basically free, and it makes all of the city-state game that's supposed to be in there irrelevant, because what is the point of sitting there slowly taking over a city-state with a whispering stone, especially if my opponent's trying to do the same one, if he can just walk over anytime he wants, takes 2 turns and kill it kind of deal. And in a minute, I'll tell you, well, actually, we'll do it right now. We'll do it right now. And this is, maybe you think to yourself, well, you should just go defend that. The there are bugs and problems with fighting with AI to defend. First of all, the AI is useless, doesn't coordinate with you at all, and doesn't grant you control when you engage in a fight where you have an AI ally, which means that what it actually does is it limits the number of units you can bring to that fight by being up to probably a third, but sometimes 2/3 of the armies actually engaged in that fight being controlled by AI. And it leaves you vulnerable to bugs, which I'll talk about later, of pulling you into fights you don't want because they exist near there. So free cities don't really work in the multiplayer environment right now at all, which is painful too, which means a bunch of the societies based around interacting with free cities really aren't that playable. It's just a mess. I don't like unique provinces and the adjacencies as a whole in this game right now either. Most of the unique provinces are unlocked by tomes. They're a buildable thing that's supposed to be a super province improvement. It does more than a normal province improvement with generally some situational buffs, like it needs to be, like it's going to hurt your stability, or you need a certain alignment to get the max value out of it, or some version of this. But a lot of these use adjacency rules where they give you better yields based on adjacencies. But there's so many competing adjacencies, both for your building bonuses and then all of the different provinces, as well as all of those adjacency bonuses competing with your actual objectives for what you need right now, mana, tech, whatever, that I really don't find this works. I rarely build unique province improvements, and basically only the ones that are better or cheaper versions of things I might want anyways. Like there's a unique Spelljammer province improvement that I can get earlier, for example. And then finally, the pacing of this game is really not there for me. Let me try to give some examples. We already talked a little bit about summons versus hard building. We already talked a little bit about tome units versus tier 3 units that you would get from your faction. These are both problems with pacing. But there's other problems with pacing. The tech seems to go up faster than the tech costs as a whole, and the tech speed increase goes up faster than the draft summoning and resource scaling. And what this means is I fight with tier 1 units a lot because I'm doing a lot of creeping with it. And probably the first tome, tier 2 tome, I maybe get some of those units, especially if they're summons, into the fights early. Then the next unit that I have time to produce is probably tier 4, because tier 3 just disappears because my tech is so good compared to the cost of these that I'm like one turning every single tech. And this continues throughout the rest of the game. And what this means is my movement speed on the map doesn't tend to get faster across the course of the game. Sometimes defensively it does. You can teleport around your own provinces if you build certain improvements, and you can like summon your hero back to your capital and that kind of thing. But like attacking enemies or moving around the enemy's map or the neutral world map doesn't get faster. But all of my techs are accelerating how rapidly I unlock them, which means that really all I can do is summon, because I can't ever get a unlocked new unit built and moved to the front line in time to be relevant. And it makes distances further, basically. So when I do like a magic victory, which is I build these structures and I have to defend them for a period of time, well, I get these structures way faster than I ought to be. And I get them like one after the other. Instead of having to slowly build them up and kind of alert my opponents they're happening, I can almost build them one turn after the other because of how fast tech is with this. Which means there's this weird situation where it's like after the early game, there isn't a game anymore because the mid game gets so compressed by how quickly you're doing tech that the mid and late game is the same and is almost immediate, and better be summons and heroes, because you're not going to have time to build armies of units and level them or do anything with them, because there just isn't going to be time. Things are ending too quickly, and all of the mid-tier units, the tier 3s and tier 4s, they're all immediately obsolete by what you're getting out from the super advanced tech that you get in the late game. And the late game tech is really strong. Some of the spells are absolutely ridiculous. So if you happen to be fighting in an area where you have a Spelljammer and your opponent doesn't, you're just going to smash them with magic because your spells are just so much more powerful. It's a real problem, the pacing of this game. All right. So probably if you guys are tracking on this, what you'll notice is I can't play multiplayer because everything's broken. And I can't play single player because the AI can't play. And this is my biggest complaint with this game. I want to play the game. I like the systems. I like the potential things I could be doing in this game, but I can't play the game in any domain. I can't play single player. It's boring and repetitive. I'm already done with it. I can't play multiplayer because it's so broken that even the most generous of opponents who agrees to your list of things you ban and attempts to avoid all the bugs still we can't really get games, especially not games with any back and forth to them, which is a huge bummer because I want to play this stupid game, but everything ends in one fight. It's ridiculous. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the bugs in this game. I don't need to comprehensively list them out, I don't think, mostly because hopefully they're getting patched out all of the time, and there's so many of them that I don't even want to try to begin with that. I'm just inevitably going to leave out dozens of them. But I do want to just highlight a couple of the bugs to kind of point out how game-breaking and how many different game-breaking bugs there are in the game. So let me point out, these are my top 7. Ready? All right. First of all, there is I mentioned this before, there's a world map slow that will take 50% of an army's movement. If you cast it twice, it's 100% of the army's movement. It stacks up. It's max movement that it bases off of. So I had a game where I won a magic victory because I could snare 3 of my opponent's armies and 1 of my opponent's hero armies twice every single turn, which meant that he couldn't move to my base to contest my magic victory because he couldn't move around the world map. I had another game where we encountered there's a tier 1 spell called Soul Overflow. It's a 20 HP modifier and an AoE, but it, unlike other buffs, it doesn't expire and it stacks with itself. Which I had an opponent just like cast this repeatedly on a group of heroes. So he's got like 3 heroes in a stack next to each other with like 250 HP, and it's just like there's no interaction with that. My spells do like 8 damage. It's ridiculous. There's a mind control spell. There's a number in this game that are strong. You take an enemy unit. But the mind control that targets magic origin units can't be resisted. It's 90% base, and it ignores resist. Even though the spell itself doesn't say it ignores resist, it just behaves that way. It ignores the resist stat of an opponent. Here's another favorite of mine. If you open the combat log in multiplayer games, or even in single-player games, you sometimes just crash, which means that the explanation of sometimes what's happening, trying to figure that out often results in losing the progress, to crashing the game and having to restart the system and get back into the game, etc. Here's another good one. The play by email, the swapping back and forth of turns, that happens each turn for a fight on the tactical map, but the notifier that tells you it's your turn is reversed when the tactical map happens. So that means when I go into tactical turns with an opponent by the play by email option, it notifies me when it's my opponent's turn and vice versa. So it looks like it's my turn every time it's my opponent's turn and vice versa. All right. Here's another big one. You can't decline to reinforce when an ally is attacked in multiplayer, which means if I have my 3 stacks of 6 close to each other and there's a scout 3 away from one of them and they attack my scout, it will pull in one of my army groups, which I won't be able to decline having pulled into that fight, and they can isolate and kill my units. It's not so bad for my own units because I just never move a scout within 3 tiles of my main army, but it's incredibly bad if you try to interact with the AI units, which do not respect that at all. So if I'm trying to defend a free city that I have invested resources in, if it has any unit stacks anywhere near me, my opponent can pull in portions of my army and cut them up piecemeal, and I can't do anything about it because I can't decline to reinforce. Here's another one. This is the last one I'm going to do, but it's another absolutely broken one. There's a sequence of capturing a city-state and releasing a city-state as a vassal that generates a hero, and you can kill this hero and then do it again. And there's essentially an infinite loop for farming science through an Imperium that lets you get science when you kill a hero. So if you wanted to, you could exploit a hero that just spawns again, kill it again, spawn it again, kill it again and again and again. All right. I love this game. It's the most hooked I've been on a game in months. I want to play the game more, especially multiplayer, and I just cannot. I cannot do it because there's no way I can engage with it being this busted right now. My hope is eventually we get something like a multiplayer overhaul mod and a balance mod, but there's so many. There's going to be a million bugs they have to squash. They're going to have to fix these major problems. The pacing ones seem like major problems to me because there's a bunch of interrelated systems that are feeding into that. And I really would like something to streamline the play-by-email gaming in this as well. But I suspect all of this is a pipe dream because I can't imagine this changing rapidly enough to be relevant anytime soon. And I'm worried that future content is going to be things that add more stuff without fixing the underlying problems that are here. So as I stand right now, I've got really strong positives for this game. I really like some awesome things about this game and some really strong dislikes about this game. I guess I leave it at a B right now for what I'm thinking about it. My final rating of it right now, with the hope, but the probably tempered hope of not really expecting this to happen, that they will fix these problems and make this game into an S tier game by fixing these massive problems. So fingers crossed, but I don't believe it. We'll see.